Everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the Noetic podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Klein, and I'm joined this evening with our lovely co-host,
Danielle Cole.
And CJ. Hello.
And so I guess I'm kind of like the MC, so I'm opening and closing, but I'm going to hand the mic over to Danielle with our opening question on the seminar, or I guess chat, more like a chat, on Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. So with that, let's get this show on the road.
All right, so today we just wanted to look at this short story and see what sense we can make of the characters here. For me, I think the misfit is the most complex and the most interesting. So I wanted to start with this passage on page 11. And for reference, we are using the edition from the Collected Works Library of America. About halfway down the page, the misfit is talking about God and religion, and he says, Jesus was the only one that ever raised the dead, and he shouldn't have done it. He's shown everything off balance. If he did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw away everything and follow him. And if he didn't, then it's nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left the best way you can, by killing somebody or burning down his house or doing some other meanness to him. No pleasure but meanness. So I think I wanted to start with asking, in general, what sense can we make of the misfit as a character, and what does this say about his stance on religion and O'Connor's through him?
That's an interesting question, because you're asking whether O'Connor is using the misfit as a sounding board for her own thoughts. And I'm curious whether you think that she is doing that, and whether she's not just saying, hey, look, there's this character, and she's just saying, this is somebody's idea of religion. Maybe it's not mine, but it could be somebody else's. I'm curious if you think that the misfit is actually like, I'm Flannery O'Connor, and I'm going to talk, about this. Yeah.
I wasn't sure about that. I think we have definitely some cynicism with religion coming out here. And we know that she read Kierkegaard as well, right? So we can interpret that as we will. But I wasn't sure if this was the misfit specifically, or if she's saying either way, either option that you take with religion, you're not going to find a good place, because either you're kind of this sheep, you're blindly following the pack, or if you renounce God and you renounce Jesus, then the only thing to do in life is to be mean.
Right. And we do have an extreme case, extreme human being here, at least in the misfit, from what we've gathered, at least prior to this page, is that he's a guy that, ran away, he's been in jail. He can't remember what he's been in jail for, but he's been in jail, and his mind just seems warped and altered. So maybe we're not dealing with a particularly sane person who's talking, not to say an unreliable narrator or unreliable character, but maybe we're seeing something in the extreme where, maybe not everybody would say, oh, well, if Jesus didn't exist, then I don't really have to kill everybody. I'll just be a good person in my own way, and I'm not going to care if Jesus exists, because I know many people like that personally. Maybe I'm included, or maybe I'm trying to be different, but there are a lot of half measures, I think, that go along with that too.
Yeah, and I think that an interesting thing that I found puzzling and equally intriguing is he, in a sense, likens himself to Christ. At the same page 11, I call myself the misfit, he said, because I can't make what all I done wrong fit what all I gone through in punishment. So, in a sense, is there any way that we could sort of think of the misfit as this almost like the sacrificial figure who's under sort of suffered all of this punishment but he's a blameless figure. That is if we, take at face value of like this misfit, like the misfit saying that he can't remember what he did wrong. You know what I mean? If he, committed these crimes, but like particularly, like patricide, that's kind of a big deal. But he can't remember it. So if he's innocent, can we say that he's almost Christ-like in a sense that he's sacrificed,
But what is he sacrificed for, I suppose, would be the question, because when we think of a Jesus, we think of somebody being sacrificed because he knows our pain, and he's sacrificing himself for the quote-unquote greater good, or for our sins to be cleansed. And I'm wondering if maybe the misfit is doing these things, or is sacrificing his quote-unquote life of, of potential goodness, as the grandma keeps alluding to. You could be a good guy. I know you're a good guy. But he says, no, I can't live that life. If maybe this is an antichrist sort of thing, where perhaps he is the opposite of that, where he has the potential to be good, but he negates that by living in this nihilism of just, well, I'm just going to just shoot up everybody and kill them because there is no meaning, or that God doesn't exist, or I find that question irrelevant, so I'm just going to do meanness for meanness' sake, like you said, Danielle. So I'm not sure, but
maybe we should explore, maybe to try and find out more about his character. What happens here when he shoots the grandmother at the end?
Yeah, that's a very telling part.
Yeah, well, this really confuses me because, so again, bottom of page 11. So the grandmother says maybe he didn't raise the dead, and the misfit says, I wasn't there, so I can't say he didn't. I wish I had have been there, he said, hitting the ground with his fist. It ain't right I wasn't there, because if I had have been there, I would have known. Listen, lady, he said in a high voice, if I had have been there, I would have known, and I wouldn't be like I am now. His voice seemed about to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own, as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, Why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children. She reached out and touched him on the shoulder. The misfit sprang back as if a snake had bitten him and shot her 3 times through the chest. Then he put his gun down on the ground and took off his glasses and began to clean them.
Yeah, so this kind of moment of vulnerability from him,
yeah.
and from the grandmother too, which is kind of crazy. It's like, you're my children, you're one of me, you're one of my own kin, and that's quite not alarming, but in the instance, I guess, of what we get before. And even prior, the grandma doesn't, I don't know if the grandma, it strikes me as grandma of the year to you all, but...
or person of the year.
Yeah, person of the year in general, yeah. And she's very mean, maybe not mean, but just not a likable character. But in this instance of death, we get a change of face. And that also brings up why she has this change of face. Is it because she's trying to save her own self, or is it because she's trying to save her family, or is it because she's seen the light and she's finding this generosity and this love of another and love of humanity that she did not get when she didn't have a gun to her face?
Yeah, I think that the question of her trying to save her family, she doesn't necessarily do that. She keeps saying, she doesn't say anywhere in the text, please don't shoot my family. She says, well, you wouldn't shoot a lady, would you? Trying to appeal just as her own singular qualities. And even when her entire family is shot, she's trying to bribe the misfit, saying, here, I'll give you all of my money. And at no point did she offer that money to them while they were all in the ditch. There's so many points where she could have said, take my money, leave my family alone, but chooses not to do that. But I think what's super interesting is in those final moments for the woman, and the misfit's like about to cry, so there's that vulnerability. But the way that I read this, and I would love to hear your guys' perspectives on it, is when she says, why, you're one of my babies, you're one of my own children. It's a moment of, and it's like Flannery O'Connor says that there's the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. So there's like that moment of clarity and of like recognition of humanity.
Yeah.
Right. So there is some really strange connection that happens between these two completely different characters in this instant. And I think, as both of you have mentioned, some sort of vulnerability is coming to the surface, which the misfit is obviously repulsed by, right? He shoots her 3 times through the chest. And Jordan mentioned earlier, all the other characters are only shot once. It's very straightforward. But here, she really triggers something within him, and vice versa. And I'm just not sure what it is that's coming up, but I think if we can look into that a little bit more, we can find out a lot more about both of them.
Well, I like what Jordan said about humanity in some way, that there was some connection between two human beings, and perhaps the misfit couldn't understand that in some way, or maybe he didn't want to, because it sounds like, in what you've quoted, Danielle, it sounds like he's quite self-aware of his own situation, of what he's doing, and of the choices that he has, that he can make in some degree, and yet he's choosing to do what he's doing right now, which I think gives this sort of gravitas to the misfit, or what makes him a complex character, like you said previously. And this moment here gives that complexity, or gives that, perhaps maybe in that moment, and maybe in the previous ones, but for me at least, that moment gave you a little glimpse, but it was only so little, because then it's just like bam, 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 and now it's done, and now he's back to who he is. But yeah, there's just this moment of maybe he saw another way, like that, an either or. Maybe he saw, oh, well, maybe I could be a good person, and then he said, nah, I'm just gonna do what I'm doing. Or, oh, maybe there is such thing as, brotherhood, I don't know, maybe, or religion, or Christ, or, oh, maybe he is my savior and my true person. He says, no, I'm just gonna just shoot her instead. So maybe there is something he's trying to balance, but he can't.
Well, it's also strange, right, what happens page 12 at the very end. So Bobby Lee is asking about grandmother's death, says she was a talker, wasn't she? The misfit says she would have been a great woman if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life.
Yeah.
Some fun, Bobby Lee said. Shut up, Bobby Lee, the misfit said. It's no real pleasure in life. So it doesn't seem like, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, it doesn't seem like he's really excited about choosing a life without God or without Jesus in it in some way. I mean, he's not enjoying what he's done, but it seems as if he feels like there's no other way.
Sure, yeah.
And if we could circle back a little bit earlier in the text on page 9, towards the top, his own father says, it's some that can live their whole life without asking about it, and it's others has to know why it is, and this boy is one of the latters. So it seems like from an early age that the misfit is constantly restless. And that, like, there's that, I guess to kind of use a Simone de Beauvoir term, that ambiguity that he's constantly wrestling with. So it seems as if he can't, and he's really intelligent too. He's intelligent, he's very perceptive, and throughout the text, he's trying to interact with the family, but he almost seems embarrassed by the fact that he's sort of inarticulate. And he seems that he's aware of the fact that he can't really quite find the right words to say, so he makes like small talk about the weather and the clouds and stuff like that. So it's interesting to me, at least, because he's probably arguably the most intelligent character in the story, and I think that's why he sort of leans towards this path of, I guess evil, you could say, because he is frustrated that there's no concrete yes or no, like, scientific evidence, you know what I mean, to prove that Christ is a savior.
Yeah, so then maybe what is the only constant, right? And the constant might be going, doing. I mean, even on page 9, even at the bottom, he lists everything he was. He was a gospel singer, in the armed service, land and sea, home and abroad, twice married, he's been an undertaker, saw a man burned alive once. He's been doing all these different things, and it almost seems to be a way to avoid asking, maybe it's a way to avoid asking that essential question, and of, oh, well, is there a God and should I believe it? Or like you said, is Jesus Christ my, Savior, and is the gospel true? That you can just do all of these things, and in that you find some sort of solace or comfort. It reminds me to even refer back to when Noetic did the Tennyson poem of Ulysses, or I think that's what the poem was called, and it talked about Odysseus and how, or Ulysses, and how just constantly going, and then when he finally got home, as sort of like continuing the story, he felt as if, well, man, like I want to go back to just my adventurous life that I had. I mean, it's great to be back home, but shit, I want to do more stuff. And maybe that's what this man is doing, or the misfit is doing in some regard, is that this adventure and this constant moving is a way to keep that question at bay, and to, I don't know, it gives you some kind of solace, because if you're sitting down, not murdering people, not doing many things, perhaps those questions come along in some way. And I'm sure we've all had to encounter that question of, of faith, of God, when we've been alone or anything like that, but maybe we've skirted past it. I know I have so many times skirted past it by doing something else, thinking of something else. I'm not killing people, but just doing other things. But maybe, I mean, that's how I look at it, at least. Or that's one little part of it, just to continue off what Jordan is saying. But that maybe he's just constantly moving.
What I didn't understand from this idea, very strange idea of faith that we're presented with here, is why is it either blindly following God, as we see the grandmother doing, and maybe superficially she's doing these things,
that's
which
another,
we could have a whole other conversation about, but it seems like O'Connor's presenting us with option A of the grandmother following Jesus, praying, or option B of the misfit who is unsure, and it's total anarchy. And he's not necessarily excited about what he's done, as we were just discussing with what happens at the very end, but he seems to believe that you're trapped in either scenario. So why is it that we can either follow God and be completely blind to the actions, whatever we're doing, or it's complete chaos at the other end of the spectrum?
Do you think that either or, I guess, in this text seems good, or it seems like a good picture? Does O'Connor paint a good picture of these two situations, or these two choices, honestly, from what you've read?
I mean, I would not read this text and want to pursue Christianity. It's more of a turn-off from Christianity, I think, than...
Or maybe of a certain kind of faith, or maybe of a certain kind of thinking, because you did talk about earlier, we sort of referenced, and by previously I meant like a couple seconds ago, but mentioned the idea of her reverting back to faith, or reverting back to Christianity in the moment when she was about to die, or when her life depended on it. And I know, at least for me personally, a lot of the times, when you're going through a bad moment, you begin to pray, and you begin to look for solace in God or anything like that, and then all of a sudden, when your life's going well, it drifts off in the background, and then when something bad happens, it's back again. So maybe that's the kind of faith that O'Connor is attacking in some way, is the fair weather sort of Christianity, or maybe not fair weather, but almost like a life vest, I suppose, where only use in case of emergency, and you have to like break the glass, and use Christianity, or use, oh, you're a good man, oh, you're one of my children, Jesus, help me.
I think that something maybe we could consider is, what, I guess, would something like revelation or sort of like passion have anything to do in this text? Because could you contend that that moment of clarity for her is that
revelation.
A moment of revelation. You know, if you think about, you know, like sort of Paul's trip on like the road to Damascus, where people a lot of times will have these just like extreme moments of clarity and like revelation and connection with God. So maybe there's something to be said of the fact that you can kind of blunder through life as, you know, saying and rehearsing to yourself like, I'm a godly person, I'm a religious person, I'm a religious person. You know, or I don't know, to use it again, Simone de Beauvoir really spoke to me in this text of, you know, the serious person and this person that subscribes to these values and just like shakes their fist and says that I am this is my identity. Or someone that persists in sort of sin and error, and it's not really until those moments where you realize that like what you had been experiencing as religion prior to a moment of passion or revelation was just like a veneer.
So you would say that neither character is right?
No, I think that, and this is like something I think that might help if we look at kind of all of the characters to see how maybe like if we kind of break down each one, maybe she kind of provides examples, not necessarily of how to act, but maybe how not to act. And maybe, I don't know, because the thing is that she doesn't really give us any concrete answers. Like, we don't necessarily feel really awesome like finishing this text. Like, there are no really redeeming characters in this text. There's no one that is like decisively good that we're rooting for. We're like, oh god, like everyone's kind of terrible in this.
No, but it's great you mentioned revelation in this, and in that moment where she had that clarity, and you know, O'Connor writes it down, so obviously it must be something must have happened, and then we don't even know if she wrote that. Ironically, I don't even want to get into that thought, but what she says after that, you know, you're one of my own children, and you're one of my babies. I mean, that to me seems to be the most sincere thing she said in that dialogue between her and the misfit, or at least in some degree. I mean, if we look back, maybe there is other things, but just to say to your killer that, oh, you're one of me, you're part of me. And I don't even know if she was even saying this, and maybe this is something we can talk about too. I don't even know if she was saying this to try to prevent him from killing her. Maybe she just said it, and she knew she's gonna die, but she just said like, you're one of my babies, you're one of my children. And maybe that was a revelation, or there's some moment where it clicked for her, and that we're all God's children, even the people or the person that is going to murder you quite heinously. And that's pretty huge.
So would you say that's not, you know, option A or B of the faith we were talking about earlier, but would you say that idea is what O'Connor is telling us that faith should look like?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We can maybe continue the idea of what she wants, what the author's intent. That's always a very fascinating thing. But there's something about that moment for me that where even to the person, I mean, it is clearly, you know, turn the cheek, you know, if we want to get biblical about it, you know, just turn the cheek again after you got slapped in the face. This is, I mean, to me, that's almost one of those moments, and perhaps it is a different option between fair weather religion or complete nihilism, that it is this thing where, well, we're all in this together, and whether you attack me or you love me, you know, we're all God's children. You're one of my children. You know, you're one of my babies.
Yeah, or like the sentiment, what is it, like, love the sinner, hate the sin?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it makes me wonder, I think that just because obviously religion and faith and belief is so complex, I think that O'Connor wants us to wrestle with that ambiguity.
Yeah.
You know, because she doesn't really give us any clear options.
Sure, and I haven't read much O'Connor besides maybe another short story in this story, so I don't know if she does have a clear point of view of Catholicism or religion in any of her other works, or whether it is something that one has to wrestle with, and that there's no clear-cut definition of this is what's good and this is what's bad.
I think at the very least we can say that the way that the grandmother is approaching Jesus in this text is not something that O'Connor would approve of.
Espouse. But then the complicated part is that then she has that moment of clarity where I think she does see it, or she does have that turn the other cheek, we're all God's children moment. And I think that's where the complication that you've mentioned, Danielle, and Jordan, you're mentioning too, arises, where it's just, oh wait, maybe she wasn't as bad as a person as I thought. And we get that from the Misfit too, as we've mentioned, where it's like, oh, maybe he has a point.
Right. I mean, I think this moment at the very end of the story is something completely out of character for her, right? So I was referring to the way that religion is approached by her earlier in the story. So
maybe it'll help our listeners if we kind of did maybe a character sketch of, because I think that we focused a lot on the meat of the ending, which is really obviously like pivotal to understanding the text and O'Connor and what she might have to say about the ambiguity of faith and belief and religion. Maybe we could just help our listeners out and give a little bit of a characterization of the grandmother who's the central figure in this story.
Sure. Well, I think you should start, because I know you had a lot of thoughts on this one.
Oh, yeah. I had a love-hate relationship with this grandma. Let me tell you. I would say one thing that I thought was interesting is how she was very concerned with her appearance and how others perceived her.
All right, I really liked on page 2, right, when we're starting off on this road trip, we get this wonderful description of what she's wearing in the car. And she has this navy blue dress on and a lot of lace and white gloves. And it says, in case of an accident, anyone seeing her dead on the highway would know at once that she was a lady. So it's a little bit ironic, but also what you mentioned earlier, she's very obsessed with appearances. She needs to appear to be well dressed. She needs to be a lady. She needs to be upright, and I was not a fan. I don't know about you.
No, I mean, just because it seems that all of this is dragged on by the grandmother. If we think, oh well, let's go to the house. Oh, the house isn't in this state. I'm sorry. Oh, she sees the guy and says, oh, you're the misfit. And, oh, well, you guys know who I am. I have to kill you now. All of this tension, or all of the drama of the story is sort of started by the grandmother. She pushes the cart, and then it goes down the hill, and it goes to its demise in some respect. So.
Yeah, I mean, she's pushy, she's a busybody, she's manipulative, she lies throughout the text.
Yeah.
I mean, she doesn't really have a whole lot. I would say one thing that I thought was interesting was the fact that she kept pushing her own agenda, but using the grandkids as like a guise. Like on the first page, she's like, oh, well, the kids have never been to East Tennessee. And then she tries to get Bailey to drive them to the plantation. Yeah. And so on page 5 says, oh, but it'd be very educational for them. Yeah. So it's interesting because she has like her own agenda and like her own way of doing things, but the way that she guises it is in like, oh, but it's beneficial for the grandchildren.
Everybody, think of the children. Yeah.
So I thought of, I don't know, the grandmother and the misfit as kind of foils to each other, where the grandmother is a terrible person but doesn't want to admit it, but the misfit is someone who just is a terrible person and is just totally fine with admitting it. Like, he is just the grandmother, but with like the facade of decency like ripped off.
Right. And she's not obviously killing people, but there is a sense of trying to hide everything, whether the clothing is something like that too, where you want to appear as if you're genial and lovely to meet and an upright person, as Danielle said, but in reality perhaps you're not that, or you're hiding some kind of lack. Yeah.
So did we think there was anything redeemable about her before the end of the story?
Well, not that I know. I mean, it's only at the end perhaps that we get that revelation. And I don't know, I think that's quite fitting of a lot of biblical stories, if we think about it, or any kind of conversion stories. It's mostly some person that is not redeemable in any way, if we think about it. I mean, even Paul. Granted, I know Paul is great and all, but he was a Roman, and didn't he turn in some of his own people in some respect? Or I mean, he wasn't quote unquote that great of a person. Or maybe I'm botching my biblical history. Maybe I can't remember much, but he was a Roman. Or I don't know, there's this other life. Or I don't know if we can think of Augustine, who quote unquote said like, I was a womanizer. And I mean, granted, like what degree, I sort of believe.
Desire.
I sort of believe that. Yeah, no, he was quite, a womanizer and prostitutes, all of that. That there is this previous life, and then there is this moment. For Augustine, it's this random passage just appeared to me, and I'm going to read it, and it's so relevant to my life. And then God tells me, and then he's a different man. And perhaps for the grandma, it was this moment. And who knows what she would have been like if she were, if she was spared at the end. But maybe that moment was her revelation, or her moment of change of heart, or change of who she was as a person. But unfortunately, she had to bite the bullet before maybe having that second life, or that born again experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of also begs the question, does the rest of the family experience that? Maybe not, obviously, to some degree, but is there any sort of like unity or closeness amongst the family in their final moments?
No. To me, I mean, it's the grandmother all the way through. I feel like the other characters might be secondary, but maybe that's just me. Since we are focusing on the grandmother and the misfit as the two main characters, it strikes me as if I'm not really sure if that was something or not.
I thought Bailey's final moments were interesting. I'm on page 8, towards the bottom. So John and Bailey are walking off with Bobby Lee and Hiram. It says, they went off towards the woods, and just as they reached the dark edge, Bailey turned, and supporting himself against a gray naked pine trunk, he shouted, "I'll be back in a minute, Mama. Wait on me." "Come back this instant," his mother shrilled, but they all disappeared into the woods. So I think at that moment, Bailey is certain of his fate, but and before this point, Bailey does not seem too fond of the grandmother in any way. He's very short with her. He's very irritable the entire trip, but I didn't know what to make of this. It just really struck me.
Yeah, it almost seems like one of those moments where, like you said, he knows, but it's almost like how do you take it, and perhaps he takes it with a little bit of humor and good spirit, in some way or another,
Yeah, and I definitely think that Bailey and his wife, I'd say they almost resign themselves to death much more readily than their grandmother does, which is interesting because you would think that usually it's the people who are like elderly are going to be willing to like probably step up to the plate first, because they're just like, I've lived my life, so I'm ready to go. I'm like ready to meet my maker. So it's interesting how the grandmother does everything to like basically cling to life. But it's interesting on page 10, they ask her, would you and that little girl like to step off yonder with Bobby Lee and Hiram and join your husband? And she says, yes, thank you.
Right.
So it's interesting because I felt bad for the wife. The wife has no name, just gets no airtime in the story, but it's interesting because she seems like such a minor character, but I was kind of struck with how dignified she was.
I liked the passage after that, and June Star doesn't want to go. I don't want to hold hands with him. June Star said he reminds me of a pig. Her final moment, she's insulting these killers, right? Yeah. Going off into the woods. Yep. It's like really charming family we have here. Well, I think that is a wrap.
Yeah, so I think, is there any sort of concluding thoughts?
Well, I think for me, it's realizing the complicated nature of a story like this, or short stories in general. And I think especially Flannery O'Connor, and in this tradition, I mean, I'm thinking of people like, at least in the back of my book, one of the reviewers compares her to the French short story writer Guy de Maupassant or something, and people like the Russian writer Anton Chekhov, and people like that who create these situations where they're not as clearly black and white as you would want them to. It's not so much of a morality tale as this is just what life is. This is what's happened. And we want to reach out and say, well, what is Flannery O'Connor telling me? What is Chekhov telling me? But then they'll just say, it's just there. This is the story. This is just what happened to these people. I think one person wrote to Anton Chekhov and said, like, why are all these terrible things happening? Why are you making these characters suffer so much? And I think he wrote back and he said, my child, or I'm just joking, like, my child, I don't make them suffer. They just live their lives. I just document it. And in some case, we get a document of life, and I feel like with Flannery O'Connor and a lot of writers similar to it, it's just like, life is messy. And us talking about it is a way to approach this messiness of life, whether it be religion or death or hypocrisy. And we see good and bad in all of these people. All of these people we mentioned, the misfit, there's some good, and obviously there's bad. And with the grandma, there's obviously bad, but there's some good. And we get that at the end, like right before she dies. And just realizing how complicated people are, I think, and how complicated life is a testament to how wonderful, and I don't know, I feel like we have to wrestle with these kind of stories, especially authors like Flannery O'Connor, and just realize, and I think by wrestling with her, we just realize how complicated life is, and how it's all in the wrestling in some way or another, and wrestling with life, and just realizing that everybody is wrestling with something, but maybe we don't know it. And then reading fiction is a way to maybe see people's wrestling and to develop empathy in some way. I mean, I feel like I've developed, I don't know about you guys, but through this conversation, I think I've developed empathy for both characters. And that empathy is, we need a lot more of that empathy, especially today. Oh my goodness, we need a lot of empathy. And I think by reading authors like Flannery O'Connor, we can perceive that empathy and just how freaking tough it is to be a human being and to tackle religion and everything.
Right. Yeah, and I think that she definitely presents this ambiguity with a lot of like wit and humor and irony. So it makes just the presentation is just much more palatable, but kind of dark and creepy at the same time. So it's great.
But that's what makes it so fascinating, is that, and even just having a discussion on it sometimes can almost seem, dare I say, futile, because you're like, okay, what is she saying? And you're like, well, maybe she's saying this, but wait, maybe she's saying that, wait, the character did this, wait, the character did that.
I think she just kind of puts it all out there and just is leaving it up to us to tease it out.
Yeah.
Wow, she was an amazing woman.
She was. And so I think, is that everyone? Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening in, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
Bye.